The Westminster bubble is now in full panic mode. The political class and global elite are very frightened right now, and for some of those within those circles, this will be deeply uncomfortable. Because something serious has emerged from the continuing Epstein fallout. Royal historian Andrew Lownie has spoken of a claim that an unnamed British Prime Minister was involved in an intimate situation involving Ghislaine Maxwell and another individual. Yes. One between the whiskers, one assumes. Now, before speculation runs ahead of facts, the time frame must be fully understood. The period most closely associated with Maxwell's strongest access to elite political and social circles sits between the late 1990s and the early 2000s. That places John Major, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown within that period. David Cameron and Boris Johnson are also former Prime Ministers today, although from a later era. And before anyone chooses to go completely off the rails and loses perspective entirely, it probably wasn't Margaret Thatcher. Now, what unsettles people is not gossip. It is the real historical record and reality that Jeffrey Epstein did not operate in isolation. He mixed with powerful and influential figures, senior politicians, members of the royal family, wealthy financiers, and other prominent public personalities. Yes, and they were all within his social world. Some visited his homes, and others remained in contact with him even after allegations had already become public knowledge. And I've covered a few of those people in previous videos on this channel and on the Jeff Taylor channel. Now, what each individual did is a separate matter, but remaining close to a man who was later exposed as a serial abuser inevitably raises questions about judgment and responsibility, especially seen as this was done once his criminal conduct was already known. This story has sharpened because one figure connected to that wider historical environment has now entered formal scrutiny. Reporting has linked Peter Mandelson, a central figure of the new Labour era, to a police investigation connected to Epstein-related material. When someone of that stature comes under examination, attention does not remain confined to one individual. It spreads across those he's associated with, across the political environment of that time. Because influence is rarely isolated, and these kinds of relationships, they often leave traces. Britain has seen how silence surrounds political figures and powerful figures, and how that silence can collapse suddenly. The Profumo affair of 1963 remains one of the clearest examples of this. Look, John Profumo, when Secretary of State for War, denied a relationship with Christine Keeler, who was also involved with a Soviet naval attaché during the Cold War. When the truth emerged, the issue went far beyond private conduct. It became a matter of denial and national risk and a loss of trust at the highest levels of government. Profumo resigned, and the government's reputation was completely damaged, and that damage became part of the historical record. Decades later, the exposure of Jimmy Savile, of that scandal, showed how wrongdoing, I have to be careful with the terminology I use because of this platform and the algorithm, how wrongdoing can remain hidden for years when status and deference surround a public figure. Savile died in 2011. At the time of his death, he was still regarded as a respected national personality. Yet, a year later, the investigations in 2012 uncovered hundreds of victims and confirmed abuse across hospitals, broadcasting institutions and charities. And, organizations that had honored him were forced to confront how warnings had been missed or ignored. A public trust had completely collapsed, and that failure remains part of modern British history. And there is also a darker memory surrounding that period. Alongside the proven abuse in the Savile case, some allegations reported in parts of the press that described experiences using language referring to satanic ritual and symbolism, and official investigations focused only on what could be evidenced in law. But those reports remained in the public consciousness, and wrongdoing can sometimes remain concealed when power and reputation intersect. That is the takeaway message from this that the public took. The Epstein case intensified these concerns because it crossed borders and involved powerful figures across finance, politics, and society. And court records, testimony, and documented material confirmed that influential individuals moved within Epstein's social world. Association alone does not establish wrongdoing. We know that. But continued proximity to a convicted offender raises legitimate questions about that judgment once his criminal history was known. Public anger in moments like this is not about private lives. It is about whether influence delayed scrutiny. Ordinary people do not receive years of silence when wrongdoing appears around them. When influential figures appear repeatedly near environments, later exposed as abusive, questions arise whether their accountability moved equally, for them as it would for somebody else. That's a big problem. The allegation concerning an unnamed former prime minister remains unverified. No confirmed identification has been made. No legal finding has been reached. But the surrounding developments are real. An active investigation touching a senior political figure from that era, Peter Mandelson, renewed scrutiny of Epstein's network, and continuing public demand for transparency where influence is involved. Stories like this change when documented evidence replaces rumour. Until that point, the reasonable course is careful observation grounded in verified developments, because when the truth becomes clear, judgment follows. And when judgment follows, there's a reckoning.